I heard Barrister Emmanuel Agebe in 2020. He gave a compelling speech, and I never thought that God would call me to West Africa to help the widow and orphan. And I heard him at an event in Washington, D.C., and Barrister Emmanuel Agebe gave a compelling address about the plight of the persecuted church in Nigeria, particularly up in the northern states. I walked up to him and I said, Barrister Agebe, I said, I normally only go to countries where I'm invited, but I'm asking you to invite me to Nigeria because your speech, your address has broken my heart, has pierced my heart about the plight of Nigerian sons and daughters of God, and you're going to take me.
That was when?
That was actually the spring of 2020.
Okay, and since then, what have you been doing?
Yeah, well, and then he challenged me. He said, well, if you can, because we had never met before, so he probably thought in his mind, is this man sincere? Is he really wanting to go to help the people of Nigeria, or is he insincere? So he said to me, Barrister Emmanuel Agebe, just met him there in Washington, D.C., the spring of 2020, COVID is just coming in, and you know what he said to me? He said, if you can secure a Nigerian visa before the end of 2020, he said, I'll bring you to Nigeria. And then through a very amazing, miraculous series of events, without his help, I was able to secure a Nigerian visa in the middle of the pandemic, and we were on our first plane in October of 2020. So the whole thing was really miraculous. And since that time, in the last 4.5 years, from October of 2020 to March of 2025, we have been all over the nation of Nigeria, loving the Nigerian people.
Since you started in Nigeria, what are the type of things you've been doing in Nigeria?
Great question. We've been trying to do as much as we can in order to help as many people as we can. So one of our first opportunities in 4.5 years ago, in October of 2020, I was taken to Adagbo in Benue State, and there was a destroyed church. And people started to gather. You know, here's a white man from the USA, and I was sitting, or standing, I should say, in the middle of this destroyed church, the Agatu Methodist Church. And they had tried to repair some of the church, but inside was grass. And there was grass on the roof of this destroyed church. And I said, my goodness, I've got to do something. So as people began to gather, about 100 of the community people there in Agatu, Obagaji in Benue State, as we were there, about 100 people gathered. And I looked inside the destroyed church, and there were goats eating the grass in the church. So as people gathered, I said, I'm going to make a commitment to this Agatu community. I said, this is now a place for the goats, but I will rebuild your church and make it a place for the sheep. And I had made a commitment. It was October of 2020. And I said, I'm going to go back to the U.S., I'm going to raise money, and you're going to have a brand new church by Resurrection Sunday, which was April the 4th in that year of 2021. So we hired a local construction manager, and we gave a gift of a rebuilt church that now seats 300 people. And we had a great day of celebration. A representative of the Methodist bishop there, representative of the Benue State governor was there, and now that church goes on. So that's really the initial step that we did to help the people of Nigeria. Since then, we've been advocating for the persecuted church up north on the issues of Sunday Jackson, the Kano State Nasarawa orphanage that kidnapped 16 children, getting those children released. We have been rebuilding the homes of widows whose husbands have been murdered by Boko Haram, Islamic State, West Africa province, by the Fulani Islamist herdsmen. We've rebuilt a number of homes for those widows. And then we've been also paying school fees of orphans whose fathers, and in some cases mothers, were killed by Islamists and jihadists. I took it upon myself in December of 2020. I met a little 10-year-old girl by the name of Ndeya. And I heard her story. Her mother, her father, her 2 younger siblings were murdered by the terrorist, and she was virtually living alone. No one to care, a 10-year-old girl. And I turned to her and I said, Ndeya, I said, we're going to take you to the finest school in Nigeria. And she gathered her belongings, she got in the car, and now for the last 4 years, she's been at one of the finest Christian boarding schools of all of Nigeria. So I call her my adopted Nigerian daughter, and she's now finishing her 4th year in this Christian boarding school. I won't give the location. And she's graduating May 30th of 2025. I'll be there at her graduation. And then we're hoping to bring her to America to continue to go into her secondary school, and then under an education visa. And then we hope to eventually adopt her into our family, my 5 children, their spouses, and our 13 grandchildren. So this little Nigerian girl, now 14, will become a member of the Devlin family. So those are many of the things that we've been able to do here in Nigeria. I go back to America, raise money of caring, loving people who are very concerned and are heartbroken about the situation here in Nigeria, particularly for the Christian church. And I recently made a commitment that to a Catholic bishop here in Nigeria, that any church that is destroyed by terrorists in his state, I will rebuild that church to the glory of God. So we're not in this, I'm not in it for any glory for myself, because anything I do to help the Nigerian people, I give glory to God. Another instance, August 1st of 2024, I was given a gift of $400,000 of brand new medical equipment. I put it in a 40-foot high cube container. I had recently met Governor Caleb Manasseh Mufwang, the newly elected governor of the state of Plateau. And I said, I have a gift for the Plateau State Hospital. And so I said, I'm going to raise the money to have it shipped from New York City to Lagos. You get it from Lagos to Jos, Plateau State, and we'll have a big celebration there at Plateau State Hospital. And we did that August 1st of 2024. We gave that gift of $400,000 of brand new medical equipment to the Plateau State Hospital. So my ministry, it's not only coming, we also do Jesus trauma healing conferences for those who have been victims of the worst degradation from the terrorists. And so whether it's the Fulanis or the ISWAP or Boko Haram, so we bring them in for 2-3 days, and we just have 20, 25, 30 victims telling their story. And we care for them, we love them, and then we go on to financially support them with cash assistance. So even though I'm just a nobody pastor, I'm a small pastor, I love Nigeria, I love the people of Nigeria, and I trust that my work will be really a revolution of the love of Jesus to show others in America, in Canada, Europe, the West. How can we care for the persecuted church? And finally, what breaks my heart, I'm the only pastor from America whose sole mission is to care for the persecuted church. Imagine that. Out of the tens of thousands of pastors in America, there's only one. And I don't say this in a prideful way, because when I say that, it breaks my heart that why am I the only pastor from America, from the West, whose sole mission is to care for the persecuted, whether it's in Nigeria or Gaza or Syria.
Okay, that brings to mind the issue of Gaza.
It's heartbreaking.
Yes, you were trying to get food into Gaza, and you could not. What happened?
Well, you know, when you gain a reputation, and I say this with full joy of the Lord, when you gain a reputation of God using you to do the impossible, like that container of $400,000 of brand new medical equipment for Plateau State Hospital, my brother, everyone told me that is impossible, because once it gets to Lagos, it'll be ripped off by the time it gets to Plateau State. And I said, no. I said, I know the verse that says, that which is impossible with man is possible with God. So 1 month after we delivered that container to Plateau State Hospital, a man I had only met one time. I mean, my life is filled with miraculous stories because I have just said, Lord, my life is not my own. I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live. Yet not I, but Christ lives in me. And the life that I now live, I live by the grace of the Son of God, who loves me and gave himself for me. So 1 month after we delivered that container to Plateau State Hospital, a man I had met one time called me and said, Dr. William Devlin of widowsandorphans.info, we hear that you can do the impossible. And I said, well, it's not me, it's God. And he said, I'm giving you a 40-foot container of the finest rice from what they call the King's Field in Thailand. And it's 23 tons, which works out to about 46,000 pounds. I don't know what that is in kilos. And he said, it's already in a container on a ship leaving Thailand, and it's coming to the port of Ashdod, Israel, because that's the only way you can get food into Gaza. And the war was going on now. This was September of 2024. And he said, I'm giving you the rice. I paid for the rice, $26,000. I'm paying for the shipping, which was about $10,000 from Bangkok to Ashdod, Israel. All you have to do is to get it to 30 miles from the port of Ashdod, Israel, into the 2 Christian churches that are still left in Gaza, the Holy Family Catholic Parish and the St. Porphyria Greek Orthodox Church. And he said, that's your assignment. And so there again, I felt like I was in the middle, as your viewers have probably seen the movies Mission Impossible. I've now gained this reputation, glory to God, where God has asked me to do the impossible. So I began to pray. I began to fast from food. And I went on a 10-day water-only fast. And I said, God, how are you going to get this rice to the 2 churches inside Gaza? So because of the war in Gaza, the Palestinian Christians went to the 2 remaining churches in Gaza. 225 families separated between these 2 churches. 300 men, women, and children in the Greek Orthodox Church. 500 in the Holy Family Catholic Church. Nowhere else to go. And God had called me to deliver the 23 tons of rice to those 2 churches. And after contacting 35 organizations in the U.S., in Israel, in Lebanon, in the UK, and 52 people within those 35 organizations, you know what everybody said to me? Over a 90-day period from September 1, October, and finally now here we are, December 1, the ship was arriving close to Christmas. Everyone said, it cannot be done. It's absolutely impossible because there's a war going on in Gaza. I made one final call to the head of a humanitarian organization in America called Samaritan's Purse, Billy Graham's son, Franklin Graham. And I said to one of Franklin Graham's lieutenants that I had worked with in other countries, and I said, my dear friend, Ken Isaacs, can you help me? And he turned to me and he said, Dr. William Devlin, when is the rice arriving? I said, within the next 2 weeks. He said, God is going to get the rice into Gaza. So the ship where the container of 23 tons of rice was on, it was delivered to the port, and 2 weeks later, just 5 days before Christmas, that container of rice that everyone said was impossible, that container of rice was delivered to those 2 churches there in Gaza in the midst of this war. And then, of course, recently, your viewers may know that all aid has been stopped to the Palestinians, whether Muslim or Christian, in Gaza. And yet, in December, right before Christmas, that was God's Christmas gift to the Christians of Gaza. And they're eating that rice even today, and they're also sharing it with their Muslim neighbors. So here's the story, and I'm glad you asked, about God can do the impossible in our lives, even when everybody else is saying it's not possible. And I kept saying to these Christian people, I said, wait a minute, isn't there a verse that says that which is impossible with man is possible with God? And these people would say to me, yes, we know the verse, but it's still impossible. And yet God can do the impossible when we put our full trust in Him.